Humanities. My name is Sue Perdue. I'm the Director of Fellowships and Grants, and I welcome you this afternoon for our talk. We're really excited to have you here. Let me introduce also my colleague, Adam Courville, who's Assistant Director of Grants and Fellowships, who's really instrumental in making our visit from Abe to William possible. We also have today about 89 folks attending online on YouTube, so welcome to all of you who are virtual. We're, I think for the first time ever, have a father and son fellowship that I know of, to my knowledge, and I have probably as much institutional knowledge as anybody here. We're in the Lemon Lounge, which is our new space. It's our Humanities Center at Virginia Humanities. The rest of the staff is working kind of down the hall back there, but we welcome you at the end of the talk to take a tour if you like, and enjoy some cookies and lemonade and iced tea. So let me introduce our two speakers today. William and Abe are Public Humanities Fellows from 2022 to 2023. Their project, as you can see, is the Vanishing Schools of Franklin County, Virginia. They both have deep roots in Franklin County. Abe was born there, went to school there. Were you born there, William?
I was born in Wise County.
Wise County, okay.
But moved
Close.
to Franklin County when I was 4.
So talk about embedded in a project. Their project is a cooperation, you might say. Abe is an assistant professor of history and digital humanities at the University of Texas in San Antonio. And then William, who worked in the Franklin County schools, still lives in Franklin County. I'm not going to tell you much more about the project. I'm going to let you two give it to us in detail, just to say that you're expecting a museum, an exhibit out of this as well as a website. So,
yes.
And I forgot to mention, William, that you're at the Blue Ridge Institute Museum and Fair.
Working, yeah, yes.
So, thanks. Take it away.
Thank you, Sue. We're very pleased to be here and very honored that, number one, we were selected to take part with the Virginia Humanities. I wasn't aware of this at all until Abe brought it to my attention. And he did all the bureaucratic work and academia work and so on. And it evolved. And we are tickled to death with this opportunity. And the more we get into it, we feel not that, that we were lucky, but now we feel like we are obligated to do the right thing and get the right amount of information out of that. I guess I'll just start at the beginning. The genesis of this project began with this fine book here called A History of Franklin County High School that I wrote about 2 years ago. And it does have a rich history. But included in that history was the naming of a superintendent in 1927 who was 25 years old and was superintendent for 41 years. But in 1927, when he came to Franklin County, there were 149 schools that he had in Franklin County. And that just overwhelming to me. And that's down from 177 that were there in 1915. So he had his hands full trying to update Franklin County, and there's no hiding behind the fact that Franklin County would, I guess, saying backward would be kind at that time, and that was for a lot of reasons. And I think when Abe was my chief editor and critic and whatever on putting this together, and I appreciate that. But from those 149 schools that we listed on just 2 pages of this book, Abe got super interested. And I'll let you take it from here.
Well, yeah, I didn't know this history at all. We both graduated from Franklin County High School, which had been established in 1950. And I just didn't know that there were any schools prior to Franklin County High School in Franklin County, let alone 177 or something like that. So I became very interested in it. And I knew that my dad had uncovered something really interesting. And when the book came out, I didn't want it to end. I felt like it was the beginning of a project. And so when, let's see if I can make this work. Yeah, so fortuitously, when Virginia Humanities announced the creation of this new program, the Public Humanities Fellowship, I knew it was an opportunity for us to continue working on this project Luckily, our application was successful, and that's when we got to work. And Dad, you can talk about, make sure I hit the right button. Well,
Yeah,
how both of us
our efforts here were somewhat divided, but united in their purpose. Abe, you can see, is an academia, has a slideshow there. I'm just overwhelmed with the technology. And you can see what I did. I went around taking pictures of the woods. I had the best job. Going all over the county, taking pictures of dilapidated schools and so on. So we divided our effort. Abe put in a lot more than slideshows. He would contact UVA, Virginia State Union, Library of Virginia, et cetera, getting resources.
And that is also being modest, because I was stuck in San Antonio. I shouldn't say stuck. Because I was in San Antonio, I wasn't able to do any of the on-the-ground research. I did the best I could remotely, but Dad also went to archives in Franklin County, and that was very helpful as well. And yeah, so we had numerous resources. You can start.
And our purpose was to find and locate originally these 149 schools. Well, and that's what we somewhat did, but we found out there were a lot more schools. There's 200 plus in Franklin County from 1900. For me, I spent hours and days at Franklin County Historical Society. A lot of information there. Franklin County Public Library. The most interesting and fun part was the oral history with older citizens. I'd go out in the county and say, all right, I heard there's a school named Scruggs. There was, out near the lakes, the Mountain Lake, and I stopped at the maps don't quite agree where the school was. Nobody can quite remember. So I would stop always at the local country store. And if you go to a local country store, you're going to find 2 or 3 gentlemen in octogenarians and or older sitting on crates or something, and they are the unofficial mayors of those communities, I guess. But I asked them, and these gentlemen, and it was always gentlemen, I don't know why, gave me a tremendous amount of information. Yes, I went to school at Scruggs Elementary. It's right down here, right across from Melvin's house and so on. You know where that is? No, I don't. And then they would get a little bit more technical. But that was the most fun part. The one thing I do regret, I didn't take a tape recorder to get the oral history. They had some great stories of going to these one-room schools. Should have done that. I spent a lot of time at Blue Ridge Institute Museum, and I encourage you, if you've never been there, it's on campus at Ferrum. They're having their 50th anniversary this October. And I think that's pretty much where I got the Dorothy Cundiff papers, who was a lady who was a retail merchant for 60, 70 years in Franklin County, collected photos, so on. We got a tremendous amount of photos, a lot of the photos you'll see today from that area.
Yep, and I want to thank the helpful librarians, archivists, and staff at these 3 institutions in particular, at the Library of Virginia, Virginia State University, and Virginia Tech. As I mentioned, I'm based in San Antonio, and so I had to rely on these helpful staff to help me track down mostly photographs, but also just historical reports from the era. And so that was a lot of fun from my perspective. So,
this is pretty much close to our end product. This is Franklin County. Franklin County is the 7th largest county in the state of Virginia. At the time, these schools, of course, you can see red and blue. Blue text being for the white schools, red being for the black schools. And kind of you can see where it's heavily black schools in this area, and that's because of the flat, sandy area, and that's mostly tobacco farming down in that area. And quite a few up here where there were apple orchards, and just made sense at that time. The reason why so many schools in such a big area are such a, why you have 177 or 149, Franklin County Again, the 7th largest county in the state of Virginia. At this time, during the early 1900s, the roads, if you call them that, were horrific, just horrific. Mud, most of them were paths, and so on. The economic status of the county community was very, very poor. There was no major industry other than probably tobacco at that time. I will say that compared to the Roanoke County, which is north of us, to give you an idea, they had 96 schools during this same time period, but they had 1/3 the size of Franklin County. And geographically, I'm sorry, geographically. And the job of consolidating, modernizing was much simpler. I won't say easy, but much more simpler in those areas. The reason, of course, size, road conditions, socioeconomic status, just no local tax base. So it was a pretty poor community during this time.
Yep, and I would just point out that in the archives, in the historical record, we have found 185 schools. We know there are more out there. We have identified them, that is, and we have actually, for the most part, located the locations where some were either where they were standing or where they are still standing in some cases. And so, what did these schools look like? Well, the earliest ones were log cabins like you see here. Sure. And simple one room. Of the 200 plus schools that we know were there, the vast majority were one room schoolhouses. And the oldest ones were log cabins just like you see here. Neither of these are standing. Again, this is, I think we have one. This is also, Price is another one room log cabin. This is very typical of the time.
I think it's important to remember that when these log cabins, that would be awful during this time, September. School in Franklin County didn't really start until late October because that was after harvest and after tobacco season. And it was certainly over no later than the end of April. So about 5 good months if you could get. Heat was not the problem. The heat outside was, but the cool weather made school bearable.
Here's an example. We suspect there's a log cabin underneath the siding. Other cases, I never paid attention to the foundation of structures or buildings until I started this project, but I came to appreciate that. Again, the vast majority of these one-room schoolhouses all had stone foundations, kind of like you would see here. We have many examples of this. This is another school in southeastern Franklin County, Dillard's Fork. We have a few other examples of one-room schoolhouses. I'll zoom in on this one so you can see it a little better. You can kind of tell, but again, typical one-room schoolhouse. And in the historical record, this has gone by 2 different names, which is why you see it listed that way, depending on the source. Again, just a stone foundation made with rocks and stones in the field, pretty much.
And the location, the actual location of the schools, for the most part, was determined by the farmer whose land they were using. They would donate, quote, a parcel of land to the school board. And once the understanding, the school board would sign it back to them for $1, which is no longer used. And most of the schools were not right on the side of the road, and they were back in the worst part of the tobacco of the farmer's land that they just didn't use. And so I had to do some tromping through the woods, over hill and over dale to get to some of these schools, and that's why they're called fieldstone schools, because a lot of the corners of these parcels of land were piles of fieldstones that the farmer had cleaned their field out, and that's what those rocks in the foundation were, fieldstones.
And in some cases, it's relatively complete foundations like that. In other cases, I'll zoom in on this one so you can get a better look. it's just stacks on the corners to support this school. So this is how the vast majority of the schools were constructed and persisted for most of the first half of the 20th century. I will say that there were a handful of two-room schools, but these were not necessarily any more advanced. They were still extremely modest, and in many cases, they were one-room structures that had just evolved and been built on or added onto, I suppose. Again, a wonderful stone foundation you can see here. I think we have a few other examples. So this is the more typical two-room structure where there's a door and you can enter, and then there's a room on the right and the left. So there were several, I'll say, two-room schools as well. This is from 1920 to 1921-22. This is Scruggs School, yep, another two-room school. Yeah, I will say the pictures of these schools, the schools and the structures themselves are great, very interesting, but the pictures of the students were even better. That's the stuff that really drew us in and we found really fascinating. A few schools were one gender, that is to say all boys or all girls. I don't have a picture of, there was a mission school called Phoebe Needles in the mountains that was all girls. Here's an example of a school that was all boys. But for the most part, it was mixed. It was boys and girls of every age, pretty much.
This is one of the few pictures we found inside a school. They just weren't, and if we did find any, this is the best quality one we found. And it's very telling. I don't know if you can see the girls, particularly on that side. The boys, I guess, on this side, holding their chalkboard. And I guess the teacher, and I don't know who that mean-looking fellow is.
And also, I would point out, this is not the last time you'll see this. Every one of them appears to be barefoot, which is also fascinating, I think, and instructive. And again, you'll see that as well in other photos we have. Here's another photo showing, again, all boys and girls mixed together from all ages, for that matter. This picture I like in particular because they also had a class pet, so they got to bring the dog for this.
Can you imagine being a teacher, though?
Yeah.
And you got to teach this young man with these four ladies, all in the same room. I mean, you taught from first grade up to 11th grade. And of course, 11th grade is as high as it went back then. So you had to be pretty skilled to be a teacher, or flexible.
This one's interesting to me personally because this is the school that we would have attended had we been born in a different era. This is the one that is the closest to where I grew up in Franklin County, Pleasant Hill. This gentleman, we have to give a shout out to Herman Harrison, who is
right here.
Still the mayor of our community.
He's 95, soon to be 96 years old.
And he's one of the barefoot children here. He's been very helpful in this project, actually. And again, I just would point out that, not for the last time, you'll see a lot of bare feet, which I think is just so wonderful. I love this image. Not only does it, again, show more students with bare feet, but it also shows the age range, which can be pretty dramatic if you look. These are all students in one classroom, bear in mind, and usually with one and no more than two teachers. And so this child can't be more than 4, maybe
4 or 5.
Yeah, sharing a classroom with students who appear to be in their late teens.
As you look at these pictures, please, you can tell pretty easily which teachers had a warning that they were going to take a picture that day based on who was dressed up. And this day they were pretty well dressed up. All the boys had on their best bib overalls, and girls were nicely dressed and so on. And you'll see some that weren't quite up to that standard.
I mentioned that we love the pictures of students the most, and one of the reasons is because you get to see a lot of personality in these photos. You see the student showing off his banjo, but also these students were just like us. They may have gone to school 100 years ago, but they had a lot of the same feelings, perhaps. So You can see, for example, that here on the left and right, I don't know what these two young girls did to warrant such treatment, but when we found this historical photograph, we knew that whoever owned this photograph had
Have some explaining to do.
yeah, I was going to say, they were obviously angry for one reason or another at these students. More evidence that they're just like us. This is a school in Nineveh in northeastern Franklin County. You can see that's either a horse or a mule.
That's not a student back here.
Yeah. That's right, another class pet. But the one that jumps out at me is this lovely girl who probably was told, it's picture day, just don't pick your nose. But just like us today, she couldn't resist. I love that that was preserved in the historical record.
We hope she passed away when this goes.
Or that she appreciates it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Because, you know, it's funny, if I may go back for a second, it's wonderful, all these students, but the ones that really I appreciated the most were the, I guess you could say, class clowns.
Yeah.
And so that's the next one. This image looks just like any of the other photos, perhaps, that we found. We found hundreds, but if you study it a little bit closer, you can find that there are indeed, it's a little fuzzy, but you can see that these, this photograph from the, I think this would have been from the 30s.
Yeah.
I appreciate these two, and maybe you can see it a little more if we back out. I love seeing things like this, and it's not the only example of class clowns that we found. Maybe you can spot the one here as well.
Yeah.
Again, if we zoom in on this young woman, I'm happy to say, I don't have it with me, but through the serendipitous good graces of the historical record, we actually have her name. She's no longer with us, but she did live a long life into her 90s. And I just love that she had a sense of humor as a kid, and 100 years later, we get to enjoy the benefit. The next picture, Dad, is the one that showed me, and I immediately knew it was going to be one of our best.
Yeah, there's no doubt. The class clowns are here.
No doubt. I don't have to circle in red who the class clowns are here. And Dad and I are both teachers, and so we can empathize with what they had to put up with. But these two guys are just great. They would not behave on picture day.
No.
And personally, I appreciate that. I know this teacher had her hands full. So, yeah, so the class clowns are often some of the best things that we have found. But that said, the candid photos are also some of the most revealing. So we've shown you the class pictures. There are a handful of pictures, like the ones you see here, that photographs that just catch students in their natural habitat, if you will, doing what students do. And so there are a few other candid photos I think that we have as well. This one's great, if you want.
Yeah, this is is this Snow Creek?
Yep.
Black school effort down in southeastern part of the county. And you can't see it real well.
Zoom in a little, yeah.
This teacher, male teacher, and it looks like, if you can see it, just leading the students in jumping jacks, calisthenics. So this was their version of PE that day, or whatever. And that was pretty candid, and all the students, you can't see it real well, but I'm sure don't have shoes.
Most of you do not, yep. There are other examples. Here is a great photo for a lot of different reasons, a lot going on here. I'll zoom in. Dad mentioned at the very beginning, I'll back up and talk about them in a second. This is, I may not have a zoomed in version yet, sorry, but on the right you can see the superintendent who Dad mentioned at the very beginning of the talk, Harold Ramsey, speaking with one of the teachers, and I thought I had zoomed in, but I love this because you can actually see one of the students in the window actually, so you can see them. It's
Even out.
Yeah, very rare to have any interior photos of these old one-room schoolhouses. Again, you can see the foundation, sort of like we already talked about. This dates back to the 30s.
Unfortunately, we don't have a date for this picture either, but someone with a lot more automotive knowledge than we have could probably date this picture based on the cars.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've already seen, we've shown you a lot of good, wonderful photos of students, but there are also a lot of great photos of teachers as well. And so these were three teachers in the early 20th century in the county seat of Rocky Mount. So here's one photo of teachers. I think we have a few more. Yep. Dudley School, which was down near where Smith Mountain Lake, if you've heard of Smith Mountain Lake, borders Franklin County now. It didn't exist at the time. It was built in, I guess, the 60s or so. But this is down in that era, and again, the car gives you some indication of when it was, and it's another illustration that they're just like us, and it's fascinating in that way. I think we have a few more pictures of teachers as well. Flint Hill.
They definitely knew when picture day was.
Yep, exactly. Yep, that's often the case. This one, we think at least one or more of these are teachers. I'll zoom in, and you can see that at least one and maybe as many as 2 or 3 of these individuals were teachers. But it's pretty rare to find a photograph of the teachers themselves, and especially like that. And so usually they are pictured with their students, and so that's what we'll actually show now. I don't know how many students we have here. We counted this last night, but
24.
Right, and so they're all ages, and they're all in a one-room schoolhouse. And the thing that really strikes me about a lot of these photos is the teacher is often one of the only ones smiling, which I think is perfect, because I don't know if any of you have experience with teaching or as an educator, but you do have to have a good sense of humor. And I've loved that it shows up in the historical record that a lot of these teachers did. It was often the case that Mrs. Crafts, that's also down near present-day Smith Mountain Lake, 99% of the students are not smiling, and yet when you zoom in, the teacher, or perhaps teachers, I think this one is certainly the teacher, is smiling. And many times we saw that, and I always appreciated that. Then, as now, you have to have a good sense of humor if you're going to go into teaching. I love finding out that has always been the case. Another great image, great shot of 6 Mile Post School in the background. And wonderful photo, of course, of these teachers as well. And the last one I'll point out with teachers is, if you can't see the teacher, I really feel for this teacher, because this is, again, a classroom of all young boys, and she's back there. So many boys you can barely see her. So I appreciate all the more her efforts. I should mention that, so every school that we have shown you so far is either 1-room or 2-room schools, because that's the vast majority of schools. None of them at this point in the early 20th century had electricity. None of them at this point had indoor plumbing. And so it's very rare to catch or to find a photograph of outdoor bathroom facilities, or if you want to call it an outhouse. And so we consider ourselves lucky that we were actually able to find a photograph of an outhouse. Many of the schools would not have a bathroom at all, and those that did would have used outhouses. And so this would have been very typical. So I'll just briefly say this. Things started to change in the late 19-teens or early 1920s. Dad already mentioned how bad the roads were in the early 20th century, and that's why you could have a school that's just in this holler, and then there's another one across the hill because it was too hard to get to. And so this is a road building machine in 1919 in Franklin County. And so with improved roads, you actually have more students going to school. And this next 2 or 3 pictures are of school buses, which is fascinating. I didn't know until we got into the study of this, because all the buses were a little bit different. School buses, back particularly in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, were privately owned, and the school would subcontract with individuals to drive the buses. And I use the word buses loosely. I mean, some basically were a flatbed truck and 2x4s and a canvas thrown over the top, and that was your school bus. And they put their name on the side, as Mr. G.E. Hutcherson did. I think that's in the Glade Hill area. We're not 100% sure. And
If you go back, Abe.
Yeah, please.
One more.
Yeah.
This one, you can see it. I mean, well, it speaks for itself.
Yeah. More
The
bare
quality
feet, I always notice.
barefoot, so, yeah, that's fine.
And yeah, it's a great photo for sure. So the construction of modern roads was a big event in Franklin County that led to the evolution of schools. Another big one was the creation, or rather the introduction of concrete. So I mentioned that all the schools you've seen so far were either 1 or 2 room schoolhouses with stone foundations that were built with stones that just happened to be lying around either in the local creek. But starting in the 1920s and 30s especially, you start to see concrete foundations at a lot of these schools. This is a 1 room school. And another reason I like this, I don't know if you're able to see it, but if you zoom in, you can actually see what else but another barefoot child. It looks like a little boy standing there in the shadows on the front porch. That's not the only school that was built with concrete foundation. This is another example. A lot of these, I just got to give credit to Virginia State University. Their special collections has a wealth of photographs from this era, and we're indebted to them.
We're very indebted because Abe, thank goodness, we had at the most maybe 2 photos of African American schools. We could not find any. And Abe contacted Virginia State and they provided us 20, 25, whatever. And we got some of our best pictures.
Including this one. We'll see the others soon. Another example from Virginia State University. This is Brown School. Again, we want to show it off because it's got this modern concrete foundation built in the 1920s or 30s. And then one last example, Nineveh. Again, a wonderful concrete foundation. And Dad and I love this school as well. You can imagine if you picture that the other side also looks kind of like this, then this must have been a resplendent learning environment. I mean, look at the windows almost go floor to ceiling. So it's a beautiful building, even if it is only a 1 room schoolhouse. Again, everything we've shown you so far is either 1 or 2 room schoolhouses, but things did start to change. The first modern schoolhouse was actually in the county seat of Franklin County, and it was beginning of the century in 1903. Let's see. This was actually the first school in Franklin County to have a concrete foundation, and it remained the only school with a concrete foundation for the next 20 years or so.
Yeah. And it was, even though it says high school, it still served first grade through 11th grade. Very, very few of the students, small percentage of students would go to high school. It really wasn't a need if you were planning on living in Franklin County. Just get your basic reading, writing, a few math skills. You could get a job anywhere in Franklin County. You didn't need high school, and people took that literally. And, that's why at one time, or up to the 40s, Franklin County had a 75% dropout rate. 75% kids just didn't need to graduate. They would hire them. So, but this was a modern, very proud facility.
And so the first building with, the first school building with concrete foundation, the first one with central heating, and the first one with indoor plumbing, and the only one with indoor plumbing for probably 2 decades thereafter. But it did not have electricity, and very quickly was insufficient for the growing number. So this is interesting. So I mentioned Virginia Tech was very helpful. They have the Smithy and Boynton collections. That's an architectural firm with some really wonderful blueprints. And so this is the blueprints for a new high school to be built in 1923 that we uncovered, and then the school itself was built basically next to the school that we just showed you.
Yeah, the 1903 building was right in front of this. And then when this was built, this 1903 building was the elementary. This was the high school, 16 rooms, auditorium, gymnasium, very modern facility, and was in use for a long time. wife and I both attended this as elementary students. Very nice school.
Yeah, and this was opened 100 years ago. And it's interesting because we start to see something resembling the modern school experience with the creation of this school. So, for example, we see the creation of athletic teams. You would have seen games and things like that at the other schools, but for the first time you actually see school spirit in the sense of athletic teams. And I think we have other examples. Yep, this is the boys basketball team from in Rocky Mount High School. Again, this is the county seat in 1929, so just a couple of years after the school was first established. This one's great for a lot of reasons. I especially, there's no question what hairstyle was in.
And
This is 1925, and just a very rich photograph for many, many different reasons. Not the last time we'll see basketball, or not the last time we'll see young women's fashion changing as well. We'll come back to that though. So as you, one thing it's, if it wasn't explicitly clear before, everything we're looking at is pre-1954. And so that means it was prior to integration. And so Franklin County, just like every school, or just like every county in America, was segregated. And so what we're looking at here is the only high school for African American students in Franklin County at the time. This would have been built in, well, I don't have the numbers with me right now, but this photograph would have been taken in the 20s or 30s. And we have a lot of great photographs of, unfortunately not the school itself, but yes, we do have a lot of photos of the students and teachers. And this is a chapter of Franklin County history that I didn't know anything about until we started this project, and I just think it's fascinating.
It's pretty interesting. This Franklin County Training School, located in Rocky Mount, less than a mile from the high school, which these students here, we think, were dormitory students. They would come in from the county on Monday morning or Sunday night, whenever, and stay at the Franklin County Training School till Friday, and then go home. The only way they could get a, quote, high school education. There were no high school services anywhere in the county outside of this till the till late 1950s.
Yeah.
So.
And again, this is more wonderful photos from the Archie G. Richardson papers at Virginia State University Special Collections, the senior class with teachers at County Training School. This one I love especially well. Not only do we get to see some young people from the early 20th century, but you'll notice that County Training School actually had electricity, and that it's because it was very close to the power dam in Rocky Mount. And so Rocky Mount High School, which we just showed you, and the County Training School, for the longest time, were the only two schools with electricity. And it's fascinating to me that the high school for African American students was one of the first to get electricity because of its location. That was fascinating. I think we have, again, I have to imagine that Archie G. Richardson, who took this photograph, it's not an accident that he captured the electrical pole in the background, because it was so novel at that time, especially for a school that served African American students. This is another shot of teachers. And if we had zoomed in, you could see on the chalkboard it's announcements, things like there's a baseball game this afternoon and that sort of thing. So more about the modern experience. And speaking of which, additional high schools were built in the 1920s and 30s. Boone's Mill High School. It's kind of hard to see here, but here you can kind of see this is one of the schools that had, these are electrical wires.
Power lines going into the school.
So again, the emergence of a modern school system, kind of. Here is Callaway High School. It is, actually, if we take a look at the back, you can see that this is the same school, but seen from behind. And again, you can see that This is taken in the mid-1930s, and there's, I would just like to point out that that's 50 years after Edison electrified Broadway in Manhattan. The remote reaches of Franklin County are finally getting electricity.
Now, what these schools led to, the high schools, it was just a domino. They built these nice high schools during the 30s, and they would also serve as elementary schools. So that would lead to the closure of some of the small one-room schools surrounding these. And the roads were improving, and so it was a domino. It was slowly evolving.
This is another one of the high schools. This is Glade Hill High School. Again, great picture of the cars from that era. Sontag High School, a large number of students of all ages. And if we take a look at the back of that school, again, you can't help but notice that electricity has arrived in Franklin County, at least at the schools. Almost none of these students would have had electricity in their homes at this time. And then I think we have one more. Yeah, Dudley. Again, if you look in the side of the picture over there, you see, and I could have gone back, but all of these schools, all of these new modern schools in the 30s, built with pretty robust concrete foundations. And yeah, we've already talked about it a little bit, but just like the schools in town, you start to see the emergence of school spirit and athletic teams and things like that. So
now, all these high schools, particularly, well, basketball primarily, they would play each other in the county. I mean, a trip from Sontag to Callaway, based on the roads, would take at least an hour. Where today we can do it in 20 minutes easy. So they would play their own little championship league. Rocky Mount High School is the only one that went over the county line and played schools from outside the county.
this is also Sontag, but later you can see this is the team from 1938. We have a few other examples. This one's great. Evidently, we gathered these are the county champions.
They're the county champions, but that big fella in the smell.
Yeah, playing the center, I suspect. Yeah, so they were proud of it. 1933, great photo showing off the basketball team at Glade Hill. Speaking of basketball teams at Glade Hill, this is 1933. Just like you to, we already talked about, we showed you the girls basketball team in Rocky Mount. That was 1925. This is 1933. You can see how fashions evolve. And so 33, keep that in mind, at the exact same school, 4 years later, uniforms have evolved. Downright scandalous. So yeah, Dad and I are both basketball fans, and so it's we're not done talking about basketball, believe it or not. I would just point out though, at this same school, Glade Hill, if you're not into athletics, it also gave opportunity to be in the school band. Here are the student musicians who found themselves, if you will, found other students who had a shared interest. And this would have been again in the mid-1930s. I mentioned basketball. One of my favorite things about these photos is the large number of schools that had basketball goals. A lot cheaper than all the equipment that you would need for a football team or something like that. And so lots and lots of one-room schoolhouses or even high schools with modern concrete foundations had basketball goals. There's many examples. This is another candid shot I love. This is Boonesville High School, but as Dad has already pointed out, it goes from first grade all the way up to high school. And of course, they had a basketball goal. Likewise, Rocky Mount at this time was serving as an elementary school, and they have a basketball goal. I didn't include all of them that had a basketball goal, but it gives you some indication of how they're spending their time. And this one I want to point out, this will be the last school we talk about. And we framed our project from about 1900 to 1950 because Franklin County High School, the book my dad wrote a book about where we both graduated from, was established in 1950, and that was the beginning of everything changing, the consolidation movement and that sort of thing.
And the closing of all those other high schools that we showed you.
Right, most of which are no longer standing, none of which are still in operation. This school is a little bit different because it was actually established in 1954. The reason we wanted to include it, though, is because it actually opened just a month or two after the Brown v. Board decision. And so it was a segregated school that when it opened, everyone knew its time was limited because with all deliberate speed, it would eventually close down. And I just want to give a shout out to Professor Claudrina Harold, who is a professor here at UVA. Some of you should know she's a wonderful professor. She actually wrote an excellent administrative history on Booker T. Washington National Monument, and I took this photograph from her book. And I'll say more about the school in a moment, but I want to give credit where it's due to Professor Harold. So, yeah, most of these schools have disappeared.
We probably, all total, no more than 48 schools remain in shabby form. This is, believe it or not, this is being redone, made habitable.
So I should point out, these are photos that my dad took. The next several that you'll see are ones that he took traveling around.
You're free to comment on the quality. This was a black school that my wife and I had to, I don't know how we would have found it if we hadn't seen a classmate who was generous enough to drive us the 2 or 3 miles as far as our car could go. And then we had to walk the last mile to this school, Coles Creek, and it is in a state of disrepair. It will not last long unless somebody does something.
Exactly. There are other schools like that as well. Again, Stone Foundation, Border School.
That was a 2-room schoolhouse.
Yep. And it's standing now, but for how long, we can only wonder. There are others. Again, another example, High Point. It's being, what's funny is Dad already pointed out, this school would have been in an empty field when it was constructed, but a century later, it's in the middle of the woods, and it's not the only example like that. Maple Branch, this one actually has a stone foundation. It's in pretty good condition, all things considered, but that's actually relatively surprising. Brown School we saw previously from a different perspective. This was a Rosenwald school, but it remains standing, but again, it's in a relative state of disrepair. There are in some cases, there is an effort to save these old schools, I'm happy to say. And so this is Salem School, and you can see that there is some effort being made to actually repair the school. Trinity, this is
the school that had a dual purpose, obviously school and a church. And of course, back then that was prevented and made, to me, wise use of the facilities. And someone is remodeling that and upgrading it and saving it.
Redwood is a community, now doubles as a community center. It was a 2-room school at the time. Wade School, you took this photo.
Yeah, it's a pool house. You can't see it across the fence. There's a pool. So they converted the little school into a pool house.
And I would point out, repaired the foundation.
Yep.
And then, this one, if you ever travel on 40 West in Rocky Mount toward Ferrum, you can look over. This is probably the best preserved school in the entire county. You mentioned it's a shop now, is that right?
It's an antique store.
Okay.
Primitives, and it's in excellent condition.
Yep.
2-room schoolhouse, and it's in good shape.
And actually have a sign celebrating the fact and giving credit to the teachers, which of course we love to see. I mentioned Booker T. Washington Elementary School earlier. It closed. Do you remember the date that it closed?
I think it closed, I believe, in 1964.
Right.
Would be the right year. And the sad thing is, it's only 10 years old, and it's in excellent condition. Back then, it was even better condition, but it closed because of outlawed segregation in Franklin County.
Right.
So I'm not sure who did it. I think the Health, Education, and Welfare Department at that time did it. It closed this nice school, and it just, thank goodness, Booker T. Washington National Monument. It's within a quarter of a mile of that monument, and made use of it and It's used as a maintenance shop and other things.
Yeah, you can see that it's actually a part of the National Park Service now.
Yeah.
And yes, so it's now it's now the maintenance facilities for Booker T. Washington National Monument. In some cases, I was fascinated to learn there are many schools that have been turned into homes. So, and a great many of them have been added on and improved. So, Retreat is one example. Sidnersville is just south of us.
Yeah, this is the back door that they made. The front of it is, well, anyway, the front of what used to be the back, except I won't confuse you anymore.
Gold Mine is another. There's a school inside of that, right? It would have been built.
Yeah, what they did here is they took it and they raised the second floor like 3 or 4 feet so they could get a second floor. And
it's not the only example. There are actually a lot of examples. I have to pick on my dad. This is his poem right here. No, this
earlier stages.
Yeah. Yeah, before he got the hang of it. No, this is Hancock, not too far from where we grew up.
Yeah.
And again, the school, the frame of the school is still in there, but it's been built on.
The man that built this cabinet worker, magician, wood. Anyway, he built his house around the school and included the house in the school. Beautiful.
Nav School, another. This is in the mountainous part of the county, near Callaway, and it's also been turned into a school. And luckily, just because of the good graces of the historical record, in a lot of cases, we're able to talk about the before or show before and after pictures. So Germantown, you may recall, was the school that had a pet dog. The building itself is still standing. For how much longer, we don't know, but we can show what it has looked like over the past 100 years. Likewise, Henry High School that visited it. Is it being used for anything now?
No, there's a church very close to it. They, I think, used it for storing a clothing closet for a community. Boone's Mill High School, still standing. We just took this photograph recently. It's actually basically being used as a maintenance facility for an apartment complex, which is right next door. It was built. But it is still standing. Likewise, Bleak Hill. This one's interesting because it would have been, I guess, a private school maybe. The man who built this school built it for his children originally. Didn't want his children going with anybody else. But as the community grew a little bit, he allowed other children to come into the school, and the school system took it over and became part of the school system.
And I guess the day you were there,
man was remodeling it to make it a guest bedroom. It's a really nice old 1900 house, very close to that.
And one of the only maybe 2 or 3 schools that we found that had a brick foundation. So interesting in that regard. Endicott is way up in the hills of Franklin County, in the western part of Franklin County. Here as a before and after. St. John's is probably even deeper, even beyond Endicott in Franklin County. And it is a pretty remarkable school in its own right. This would have been a mission school, I think, at the time. Dillard's Fork we showed you earlier. This is a school for African Americans at the time. Still standing. You can see that the foundation is falling apart. And so hopefully there's an effort made to save that at some point. And one last that's still standing, Cool Branch. It's kind of hard to see. This part is kind of behind the trees and brush there. But again, there are examples of schools still standing. And ones that are not. So this is a photo that was taken in the 1970s when Dad went back to check on it. All that's left is what you see here. And so, and this kind of gives you an indication of why we named the project the Vanishing Schools of Franklin County. And hopefully this gift works, it does. Yeah. So what you see is in 1950 you had something around the order of 180 schools. We've got about 160 of them listed there. And today, no more than a handful, a little more than a dozen schools. And so they've all been consolidated. Most of the others have disappeared entirely, although as you've seen, not all of them. And so, you've been very patient. We can say, what's next?
On October 28th, I think, is the Blue Ridge Institute Museum is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Folk Life Festival. And if you ever had a chance, it's a wonderful, wonderful festival they've been doing for 50 years. And the Blue Ridge Institute is in charge of that. And we're lucky enough that we're going to have to share space and have a room in there to exhibit all the pictures, all 225 plus pictures and maps and so on. So we're going to do that. That's when we're going to let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Likewise, that same day, we're also going to launch a website, vanishingschools.com. I already have the URL. You can check back in late October, and if you're unable to make it to the Folk Life Festival in late October, you'll still be able to see all of our research because we're putting it together. This is actually an ArcGIS map, and I don't know, so this is the website, the front page. You'll see we have an A to Z list of schools with 200 plus schools. This is the interactive map. You'll be able to click on each of these schools and it'll bring up all of the research that Dad and I found over the course of this project. And just a quick shout out to the Scholars Lab here at University of Virginia. I actually learned how to use ArcGIS for this project from Chris Gist and Drew McQueen, who allowed me to join their online tutorials remotely from San Antonio. And I would also say, as we begin to close down here, it's appropriate that we're giving this talk in Charlottesville, where the digital humanities were first invented 30 years ago. That's because I don't think this project has to end just yet. So this should look familiar to most of you. What we're looking at here is Albemarle County. And as it suggests here, maybe this project could be expanded, whether it's us or someone else. We have schoolhouse maps for every single county in Virginia. And so in theory, one could do the project just like we have done, not just for Franklin County, although Franklin County is superlative in a lot of ways. It's also not necessarily the only school. And so here I've taken the liberty, blue schools are schools that were for white students, orange schools are for African American students here in Albemarle County. And so every single county could, in theory, reproduce this project, and I'm hoping there's an appetite for that among a lot of the people here. Scholars Lab, Institute for Advanced Technology and the Humanities, the Center for Race and Public Education in the South. There are a lot of resources here at the University of Virginia, and so I'll probably reach out to them. But since we are out of time, I will just say thank you.
We allowed at least 1 minute for questions. We did run a little long. If you have any questions now, or yes, ma'am.
I'm curious why Virginia State University has such a good collection. Who back in the day do you think had saved all these pictures?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I was relying on one collection in particular. It's called the Archie G. Richardson Papers, his personal collections. He was an administrator in the Department of Education for African American students at the time. He drove all over the Commonwealth taking pictures of. So if you had, for example, Albemarle or any other county, there would be similar photos like that in this amazing collection at Virginia State University. I encourage everybody to look up the county that you're interested in. They're not digitized. I had to rely on the archivists and librarians there to help me, which they very graciously did. And although I didn't provide the source citation on my photographs here, at the museum exhibit and on the website, all of the photos will be sourced and cited.
Have you checked Jackson Davis' collection here at the university? He was the first superintendent of African American schools, and he's got over 5,000 photographs, and they're all digitized at the university.
You said Jackson Davis?
Jackson Davis.
Wonderful. We've looked here. Perhaps he didn't go to Franklin County. I'm not sure, but at any rate, it's a wonderful resource. I need to look into.
But they include county.
That's awesome.
Categorization.
We were hoping to get suggestions, so that's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Probably. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I noticed, I think it was the slide with the map. It has Smith Mountain Lake on it, correct? That
The new
upper
one, yeah.
northeast corner.
Yes.
Do you think there are any schools that were swallowed
Yes,
up by
there
the lake?
were. Great question. We know at least, we think at least 3 or 4 were flooded. But I think, of course, Smith Mountain Lake didn't come about mid-1960s, and by that time the schools were not functioning as schools. I do know one of the schools, Kemp's Ford, which is it forded Roanoke River, which helps make, is now part of the Explorer Park in Roanoke. They took it down, took it over there, and it's now part of their wedding venue. And so.
And we did talk to people who lived at the time and remembered that, for example, it used to be that you would just cross the river and you would be, these were your neighbors. But after the lake was created, that was no longer an option, so you couldn't walk across the
It
river.
would be a good hour, hour and a half to get from
Yeah.
one neighbor to go all the way around the lake. There was only one bridge, and so
But that's a great
it
question.
changed the community.
So I have lots of questions. I've been researching and preserving historic African American schools from this period for several years now.
Excellent.
And I'm wondering if you were the school board minutes still extant for Franklin County?
Yeah, I went through, when I did the book on Franklin County High School, I went through the school board minutes from 1873 till present.
Wow.
Yeah, and, but the most noticeable thing about the school board minutes is lack of information. So much of it, at least 1/3 of the minutes appeared to be reimbursing G.E. Hutcherson a tire for his bus. It was that type of, they were meticulous on what every nickel that was spent. And so
Yeah.
didn't spend a lot of time, though, getting into what I would consider meatier subjects.
It's daunting, but in between some of those things that you can find really good information, but
Yeah,
some of the best information I've found is from school board minutes.
yeah.
I have found very little information on African American schools at the state library. Most of that is administrative stuff that's really boring. Rosenwald School, you mentioned the one, Brown School. Were there other Rosenwalds in Franklin?
Yeah, so you may already know this, of course, but the Virginia Department of Historic Resources has this amazing project where it maps all of the Rosenwald schools in Virginia.
Virginia Preservation.
Okay, sorry, thank you, appreciate it, thank you for the clarification. Yes, and so they have 4 Rosenwald schools on their map. And so it suggests that this sort of grassroots, on-the-ground research can identify a lot more schools that are from the African American, serving the African American community. They may not have all been funded with Rosenwald funds. Some were. We've shown.
We found 4 that
Yeah.
were definitely
Yeah, they were funded with Rosenwald.
Rosenwald.
Yeah, and others that were older than that and preceded that, for sure. And I would just point, since you're interested, you may already know this, a lot of what we found was from the Virginia State Planning Board in the 1930s. So the Virginia State Planning Board, the Volume 6 looks at education, 1935, every single county. And feel free to reach out and I can get you more information, but I think you got everything you need there. They have a copy at the Library of Virginia.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful foundation that will give you, I suspect, a lot of information.
Cloakrooms, were they typical in the white schools?
They were in the 2-room schoolhouses, where they had the one door in the center. You walk in and you're facing the cloakroom, basically. I think it was cloakroom, storage room, whatever. And then you go right or left, depending, you'd be in one classroom or another. But they were pretty common. Most of the 2-room, not all, the majority of the 2-room schoolhouses had the same floor plan. Just internet.
By that time, the Department of Education had been founded in 1918, and they were starting to put out prototype plans, just like the
Exactly.
Rosenwald program was. And the Rosenwald program influenced the architecture of a lot of the white schools with the large banked windows. That's very typical of the Rosenwald plans, and then the whites were doing the same thing.
Yeah, the quality of the schools improved.
And I recognized a couple of the schools you showed as being prototype plans from the Virginia Department of Education. You showed a map of the school survey of Albemarle County. What date is that?
So that's from the,
30,
that's from the, this is from what I just told you about, Virginia State Planning Board had put out
Okay.
many different volumes. This is volume 6, and every single county is included within it. That's 1935.
35.
Don't know if they have a copy here at the University of Virginia. They definitely have one at the Library of Virginia and a handful of other locations. You can look on WorldCat. But it's an unbelievable resource that my dad uncovered, and this resource is the thing that actually got me really interested in this project. Couldn't imagine that. You can imagine. It's the foundation of a potentially really cool project.
Yeah. I wish it was a little earlier, but still, I'd love to know. I mean, that progressive period,
Well,
from the 1910 to,
Right.
to the Second World War, was very important. And I just wonder, any of the white schools, do you know, were they funded by some of the progressive programs?
not that I'm aware of.
Right,
no.
right, I know.
Not-
and unfortunately, it doesn't show up here, but I know in the Franklin County version of this, if it has a dotted line, it means that the school is no longer in existence, and you'll see that for a lot of the counties, and so you'll be able to uncover
That's a
some of
great
that.
resource.
Oh, it's
I didn't know
unbelievable.
about this.
Yeah,
So we'll
and
talk.
we encourage, and we hope other individuals will do what we did,
Yeah, it's.
because I won't live to do all that.
Well, this is already going on for Albemarle County.
Right,
There
right.
are some people, I've been studying the 7 Rosenwald schools that were constructed in Albemarle, and some of the non-Rosenwalds also for Black African Americans.
Just a personal note, I hope people will get out and take advantage of this. The sooner the better, because some of these natural human resources are fading quick. And they have some of the best stories.
Yeah.
Great stories about toting water to the school every morning, starting the fires in the stoves, and all kinds of stories. Wonderful.
I've done, sir, we'll talk.
No,
Sure.
The bore everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
So, was your baseball picture Rocky Mountain 1929, because they were the state champions in
That year.
1929? That's the state championship team.
I didn't realize that.
And
Yeah.
State.
the state championship team. I was just looking it up because I thought, I was thinking one of the 1920 girls teams was one of the state champions, but I can't
Oh,
find
that's
that yet.
fascinating. I didn't realize that.
But the basketball team, the boys basketball team,
State champion.
was the state champions in 1929, and in 1928, they lost to what is now, what was then Alexandria High School, was a lot of different things, and it's back to being Alexandria High School.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. State champion.
I wondered if the girls' basketball uniforms, the drastic change that you pointed out. My mother told me about playing girls' basketball in 1920s, early 20s, and it was a very different game for the girls. They would just have to stand still and throw it to different, so they didn't have the kind of uniforms that the boys had.
Protect their fragility. You couldn't go past half court if you were
Yeah.
this and that. We have a great picture, we didn't have it, of Callaway girls basketball team, which is a picture of her mother,
Yeah.
my wife's mother, and she was just a powerhouse at a 5'4", 5'2", 5'2" power forward. That's what they listed her as.
Sorry, it was Graham High School that won the girls' basketball state championship.
Great.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you.
And Mary.
Yeah, I know, we got wrapped on.
Appreciate all of this talk, this was great, and all of your great questions and a lot of information exchanged, so thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.